Space Harrier is a 1985 Sega arcade classic. While it's not the most popular game from that time nowadays, if you've clicked on this video, I'm sure you're at least aware of it. But something that strikes me as odd about the game are the names of the 18 worlds you visit throughout the game. Those being, and I'm going by the pronunciations included in the Japanese Sega Mark III manual of the game and ignoring the two bonus scenes, Moot, Giza, Amar, Seychelles, Ulysses, Lucasia, Ida, Revi, Minia, Parms, Drail, Ashute, Visel, Natra, Nark, and Absembel. While the game's development has been fairly well documented, the origin of these names hasn't. I'm sure a lot of them take from many different foreign languages that I don't understand, but these references have yet to have been documented by anyone who would, and my own research left me mostly empty-handed. One thing I did find was that Olesis is also the name of a character from the game Botsugun, and I read that it's a play on the name of the Egyptian god Osiris, but this claim is unsubstantiated. And even if I do sort of have an idea as to what the origin of some of these names are, I don't know why they were chosen for that particular stage. Like, Natra is the least natural looking environment in the game. That being said, I do have some of my own theories about some of the names' origins though. Giza just seems to be a pretty clear reference to Giza in Egypt, given that it's a desert stage. Less able to be substantiated is my theory that Lucasia is named after George Lucas. Given the game's science fantasy setting, it's likely that whoever named these stages, probably designer programmer Yu Suzuki, had Star Wars on the mind. That's not too far off, as the game does take uncomfortably close inspiration from popular sci-fi series of the time. The jet enemy is clearly just lifted from the VF-1 Valkyrie from the anime series Macros, and the Dom enemy is clearly inspired by the MS-09 Dom mech from Gundam, so it's likely. That being said, Lucasia was also a nickname 17th century English poet Catherine Phillips gave to her friend. But it's not even known where a lot of the other names for the creatures that appear throughout the game came from. Though I find it likely that the game's cute, friendly dragon character Uriah might be named after the band Uriah Heep, itself named after the character from the novel David Copperfield. Honestly, this name origin mystery doesn't just apply to the first game, but extends to the game's numerous sequels, but I'm just focusing on the original here. That being said, the final boss of the Master System version, Hayao, is named after Sega president at the time, Hayao Nakayama. It's likely that a lot of this stuff was named after people from Sega. Speaking of which, there is one name that has a theory already floating around about its origin, and it makes things a million times more confusing. According to this tweet by Japanese Twitter user Sci-Fi TZK, who seems to be a freelance game developer and Sega enthusiast, the Canary enemy was named after Sega employee Minoru Kanari. But there's a theory that the Yida enemy, which is this head thing, and by extension the stage, was named after a Sega employee whose surname was Yida. The Canary thing at least answers something, but if you remember, according to the Mark III manual, that name, both referring to the enemy and the stage, is supposed to be pronounced Ida, but this tweet features two theorized kanji spellings for this person's name that both read as Yida. I wonder why the ah sound was added at the beginning. From what I could find, Sega has had 3 employees with the surname Yida spelt with the more complex kanji, but they all joined over a decade after Space Harrier's development took place. However, there is one Sega employee with the name Takaya Yida whose name I could only find spelt that way in Latin characters, who likely would have been at Sega at the time, as they had designed Sega's arcade games Starjacker, Future Spy, and the Laserdisc game GP World, from 1983 to 1984, meaning they could have been around during Space Harrier's development in 1985. However, there's an odd gap in their resume, as they seemingly have absolutely zero video game credits to their name from 1985 to 1997, with their first credit in 14 years being included in developer Yume Kobo's Blazing Star for the Neo Geo from 1998, where they're credited as a producer. And they only have one more credit as a planner on yet another Sega game, the 1999 arcade game Kase Channel Mars TV. It's really strange stuff. Is this the Yida that the enemy and the stage heavily inhabited by them from Space Harrier are named after? If so, why does the manual insist that it's pronounced Ida? Why is there a huge gap in their video game credits? Why did they seemingly work at Yume Kobo only to return to Sega? Another Space Harrier mystery is the mystery of who provided the voice of the main character.
Welcome to the Fantasy Zone. Get ready.
Which is uncredited, and shockingly not a whole lot of people seem to care about it. My best guess is that it's an American employee of Sega who was visiting the developers around the time that the game was being developed, given the character's strongly American accent. This was kind of a standard practice at the time. It's interesting nonetheless. When the first Street Fighter game was ported to the PC Engine CD-ROM system as a launch title in 1988, it was renamed to Fighting Street. According to Street Fighter II producer and video game legend Yoshiki Okamoto in a video he released in 2021, Namco actually owned the rights to the name Street Fight, and thus when Hudson released the PC Engine port of Street Fighter, they renamed it to Fighting Street to avoid legal issues. Also stating that he believed that Capcom was still paying Bandai Namco to even use the name. This is a very interesting situation. It's likely this might actually be the reason the planned NES port of the original Street Fighter that I've discussed in videos previously was cancelled. There's also a very real possibility that Street Fighter II wouldn't have been ported to consoles or would have also have had its name changed for this reason. It's also likely that this is the reason Capcom renamed the game they had originally planned to title Street Fighter 89 to Final Fight. However, from what I can tell, Okamoto never specified whether or not Namco owned the name for all manner of video games or just console games. And I obviously don't have access to any old Japanese Namco trademark information, so I can't be sure. However, I think it's likely that around 1989 or 1990, before Capcom would release their next game with Street Fighter in the title, Namco lost the rights due to Street Fight being an overly generic term that you can't really copyright, or the rights were just relinquished to Capcom. What I find most interesting though is what Namco was potentially planning to do with the name. They obviously never released their Street Fight game, as we would be living in a very different world right now if they did, but I wonder if this was a working title for one of the games they did release, but I can't think of anything. Who knows? But in the comments of Okamoto's video, I saw a few people saying that Namco owned the rights to the name Gradius, which is why Konami renamed the international arcade version of Gradius to Nemesis. But I have an extremely hard time believing this. That being said, I do wonder why the game was renamed, as there's no substantiated information about that either. So, when Nintendo launched the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America in 1985, one of the clear goals they had with their marketing was to not mislead people with covers that weren't representative of the actual game. This led them to create the iconic black box and gray box NES covers, which included little simplistic pixel art meant to try to accurately represent scenes from the games. While it wasn't always accurate, like with Super Mario Bros.'s cover, this is not actually what the in-game graphics look like, as the NES can't display graphics this colorful, and Mario is about to meet his boiling demise. They were accurate enough and super iconic. When Sega launched the Master System in North America the following year, it's very clear that they wanted their marketing to have a similar simplistic appeal. So they commissioned these very simplistic drawn pieces that barely take up any space on the front covers, consisting mainly of the game's name and a white grid-line background. Sega didn't necessarily achieve what they wanted to do, however, as many of these covers would become infamous for their poor quality or off-putting nature. Having most of these boxes be primarily taken up by the name of the game using the exact same font over a boring gridline background made them not very visually appealing. But a lot of the time, these covers would just feature strange art, like with the pro wrestling cover, or just lazy art like with the black belt cover, which is only a drawing of a kicking leg. Works of true art, if you will. Not all of these pieces of art were even necessarily bad. The style of the covers was just too minimalistic, in my and many others' opinions at the very least. After March of 1988, the covers for the system's games would begin including more detailed art that took up more space. And starting with the release of R-Type in December of 1988, unique logos were now allowed. But I would really love to know who exactly was responsible for a lot of this early art, and especially how much they were paid, or if they were even paid at all. Listen, I wouldn't put it past Sega. It's clear they weren't given a whole lot of materials or time, and a lot of the art straight up looks traced from other art or in-game graphics. But as bad as it is, I love it, and it's very clear to me that the poor quality of these boxes definitely wasn't the artist's fault, but rather the fault of the computer duster huffing execs at Sega. So it'd be nice to know who these artists are. That being said, this isn't the only interesting art from Sega games that has gone uncredited. Fasting forward to 1995 and 1996, what do Sonic Labyrinth and Sonic Blast have in common? That's right, they were both the last two Sonic games released for the Sega Game Gear, if you ignore the Sonic 2-in-1 compilation that released between them. They definitely don't have anything else in common that you were totally thinking about when I brought them up, but they both have another thing in common. The Japanese manuals for both Sonic Labyrinth and G-Sonic, the Japanese name of Sonic Blast, both contain story sections with artwork done in the same kind of endearingly crude style. Unlike the Master System covers, the crudeness here feels intentional, almost as if it was scribbled out by Sonic himself in MS Paint or something. And it really does look like that's what they used. I really like this style. I mean, of course I like crude drawings of Sonic characters from Japanese manuals. Where do you think my profile pic comes from? But while we know that Hirokazu Yasuhara is responsible for those drawings, I looked everywhere and I could not come up with a definitive answer on who drew these. I couldn't even find a shared artist or special thanks credit between the two games, which makes sense as they were developed by two different companies. Sonic Labyrinth was developed by Minato Giken, a company founded by a former programmer for Sega and Arc System Works, and G-Sonic was made by Aspect, who developed the previous three 8-bit Sonic platformers along with Tails Adventure. So this was probably done by a Sega employee, but from what I could read, they aren't credited in the manual itself. It really sucks because I like this art style. While these two games may not be particularly good, they at least have some lambuxuacious appeal. But all of this is interesting nonetheless. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more, check out the first 2 videos in this series. Also, check out my review of the obscure game Ginga Fukei Densetsu Sapphire, as I also discuss a mystery regarding that game that I'm sure you'll find interesting. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful existence.